Okay, so I've got my paper for my Hegel class with Professor Todd McGowan here, and I decided to write it on the concept of the crux of the matter from the phenomenology in the reason section. And initially, I was interested in writing about the religion section from the phenomenology because I think like Hegel explores the theme of representation and why it's so central to the whole project of the phenomenology very well. And I think that's like a theme why I'm so attracted to Jacques Ranciere's thought on politics and aesthetics. Um, um, but I think that like when writing through it, I actually found that the reason section, um, I think it's a little bit more into like the meat of how Hegel um, takes a more like deeper look at representation than Kant does, and like why that's so important. Um, and then that whole theme of like critiquing critical philosophy is something that like Rancière and Bruno Latour will eventually pick up, and that has been like very influential in my own thinking. But anyway, yeah, just to walk through my paper a bit, I start with Kant, and um, I just introduced how he advances upon his contemporaries, um, especially the dogmatists like Descartes and Leibniz, who um, confer upon subjects like access to reality as it is, reality out there. Um, but Kant says to that that's about a lot of baloney, and in reality, we don't know anything of the object in itself, but we only know um, anything of the representation of objects that we have, which are structured by the a priori forms of our intuition, namely space and time. And so, although um, those we don't represent the object in itself to ourselves, because we have these a priori categories um, that um, he proves are universal and necessary in order for us to even conceive of the validity of a simple statement like um, a, a body is heavy. Um, there must be objectively valid uh, conceptual judgments that we can have of objects. And so that's really like the big advance that Kant makes um, in rejecting this like ontological monism, um, but also still giving like objective validity to the judgments of that we make, which is what the people like Hume and Berkeley would reject. And so, um, the big insight that Kant also makes, or the big statement that he makes as well, that Hegel will then start to depart from, is that we can know anything about like the nature of reason itself beyond like its limits. Um, we can know nothing like really positive about reason. We can only know about the understanding that faculty. We can only know about that faculty of making conceptual judgments. And so this is where Hegel comes in. Um, he, just like Kant, kind of affirms this like distinction between Vernunft reason and versed on understanding, um, as I kind of had just described. But what he does is he calls attention to the movement of reason itself, in the way that, like, whereas Kant takes reason in what he perceives it to be, like reason's like perfected form of its critical lens against itself and its own um, possibility of knowledge. Hegel actually looks at the whole movement of reason, from the reason that takes its assertions about the world to be true, um, a la the dogmatists, and the reason, the critical reason that Kant employs. And what he points out is that, like, both of these reasons really share this underlying logic, where um, both both reasons kind of assert this thing that, like, can't really, like, actually know. And for, like, the dogmatists, that's what Kant critiqued them for. But then Kant also, like, posits this world of the thing in itself, which it can't really substantiate. Um, and Kant kind of, gets away with it because, like, he left it ambiguous enough so that, like, people kind of debate what he actually meant. Like, is there two worlds or only two aspects, of which, are there two worlds of objects or only two aspects in which we see this single object? One aspect, like, being the phenomenal aspect, and one aspect being, like, the aspect inaccessible to the human consciousness. But anyway, what Hegel does is bring a more definitive, like, conclusion to that whole conversation by showing that, like, no matter what reason does, reason's activity will always, when taken to its final logical conclusion, reason finds that it has difference in itself. And this is the really, what Hegel identifies as the crux of the matter, the thing itself that is pivotal, um, in all of the phenomenology, is this moment. It's the crux of the matter, because the thing itself here is that the structure of reason itself, which shows itself to be contradictory. And that's really the crux, because reason for Hegel is like, and for Kant, is kind of like the highest level of human cognition. Reason is like the transcendent that Kant identified, and that, um, it was reason itself is like part of the beyond that, Hegel did not, like, believe philosophers could have any meddlings with, at least in the positive sense. And so this crux of the matter reveals, like, all of this, like, all of these things that we've, shown getting up to this point of the phenomenology. Like, we're actually, like, have been kind of contradicting ourselves the whole time. But by identifying this difference with itself, reason, we find instead something that is perhaps really liberating, which is that, like, truth has difference in itself, and all of the, like, things out there, like, that we found that were really just our perception of them. Reason is no different. And, like, the way we conceived of reason in itself also was only the way we were conceiving of it. And so this is just ultimate self-reflexivity, and it becomes, like, just very, you see it run through everything, and why representation is so pivotal, how we represent difference to ourselves.